Everyone says justice belongs to powerful men with badges and titles. But we know it often begins in the hands of someone who has nothing left to lose. Today is the story of Rhett Calder and Asha, where a noose-scarred past becomes unbreakable strength. Out on the wide, wind-burned prairie, it all began with a single cut of a knife. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. At sunup, the whole of Liberty crowded the steps of the weather-beaten courthouse. A shack and 12 lonely acres were up for sale, scrubland and a half-dead well included. The opening bid drifted across the square like a bad joke. 12 cents. A ripple of uneasy laughter rolled through the Ironwood Folk, then died quick. Boots scraped, spurs jingled. No one stepped forward. The richest ranchers in the county stood stiff as fence posts, eyes cold, as if the land carried a curse no money could scrub clean. From the back of the crowd, a broad-shouldered cowhand in a faded hat lifted his hand slow and steady. 12 cents, Rhett Calder said. His voice carried, low and gravel-thick. Heads turned. Not one of them looked jealous. They looked sorry for him, like he'd just signed his own death warrant. Leland Crow cleared his throat. "Do I hear anything higher?" Silence swallowed the square hole. The gavel struck wood with a hard crack. Sold. On the ride out, Rhett could still feel their stares pressing between his shoulder blades. They didn't have to speak. The warning rode the wind beside him. Don't go out there. But Rhett Calder had already lost near everything worth keeping. A 12-cent cabin, a patch of dirt, a leaning barn. That was enough to start over with the few scrawny cattle he had left. The trail bent through thin timber and waist-high grass until the place came into view. The gate stood crooked against the sky, and something hung from it. Rhett pulled the reins tight. His horse snorted, uneasy. A body swayed slow in the breeze. It was an Apache woman. Not just any woman. She was massive, built like she'd been carved from canyon stone. Taller than most men Rhett knew, shoulders wide as a barn door. Even strung up, her boots nearly brushed the ground. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood. One eye was half open, still alive. Rhett was off his saddle in a heartbeat. Steel flashed as he drew his knife and strode for the gate. So this was what 12 cents bought a man. He cut the rope in one clean stroke. Her body dropped hard, knocking him back a step. The weight of her hit like a falling oak. Rhett's boots slid in the dust as he caught part of her, knees slamming into the dirt. He'd wrestled longhorns and broken wild horses, but he'd never tried to hold up something built with this kind of strength. She lay on the dry grass, chest rising in jagged pulls, each breath sounding like it might be her last. Rhett ripped a strip from his shirt and pressed it around the torn flesh at her neck, binding the rope burn, as careful as his rough hands allowed. They trembled, whether from effort or something deeper. He couldn't tell. "Stay with me," he muttered, voice low and steady. Her dark eyes opened wider, blazing despite the pain. She tried to speak. Words in her own tongue, fierce and broken. Rhett didn't understand a syllable, but he understood the look. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was fighting to live. He uncapped his canteen and let a few drops of water fall onto her cracked lips. Her throat worked weakly. The breathing steadied, just a little. Rhett crouched beside her and glanced up at the gate. The beam still bore the groove where the rope had bitten deep. Dried blood stained the gray wood. Whoever did this meant it to be seen. A warning. Rhett's jaw tightened. 12 cents hadn't bought him a cabin. It had bought him trouble. That 12-cent shack wasn't a blessing. It was bait. As the sun bled red across the horizon, Rhett Calder hauled the woman inside. The cabin smelled of old timber and long-settled dust. Boards covered the windows tight. shutting out the last of the daylight. The floor, though, was sturdy, and inside the cast-iron stove, gray ashes still lingered, recent enough to raise questions. This place hadn't sat empty for 15 years, not the way the Ironwood Folk claimed. Rhett laid the woman, Asha, across a scarred wooden table and drew a blanket over her broad shoulders. He studied her face in silence. He knew that face. He'd heard the stories whispered over whiskey at trading posts. Asha, granddaughter of Talok, warrior blood. Taller than most braves, fierce as a desert storm. The legends hadn't exaggerated. So why was Talok's granddaughter hanging from a ranch gate like a warning sign? Rhett stepped out onto the porch and scanned the dying light. At the edge of the tree line, a lone rider waited. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat with a silver band that caught the last sliver of sun. He didn't move forward, didn't retreat, just watched. When Rhett's eyes locked onto him, the rider turned his horse smooth and vanished into the timber without a word. A chill slid down Rhett's spine. The pity in town hadn't been about the land. Someone had known what waited here. Inside, Asha stirred. Her voice scraped like dry wind across stone. One word came clear in English. Danger. They'll return. Rhett's jaw hardened. He hadn't set out looking for a war. He'd only wanted dirt to stand on and a place to start over. But with a 12-cent cabin and Talok's granddaughter fighting for breath under his roof, peace was already behind him. That night, sleep never found him. Firelight flickered along the warped walls, throwing restless shadows. Asha lay bundled in blankets, groaning now and then. Every time she shifted, the old bed frame groaned in protest under her weight. Rhett sat nearby, Winchester across his knees. He'd faced wolves, rustlers, long winters alone beneath open sky. But this felt different. Who hangs a woman at a gate for show? And why had an entire town kept quiet about it? When dawn broke pale and cold, Rhett saddled up. Asha needed proper bandages, clean water, something stronger than scraps and hope. He locked the cabin behind him and rode the trail back into Liberty. The moment he stepped into the general store, the air tightened. Voices cut off mid-sentence. The Ironwood Folk pretended not to stare. A pair of women bent low over bolts of fabric, though their eyes tracked him in the mirror. Rhett walked straight to the counter and dropped coins down hard. I need bandages, antiseptic, dried food. Milt Harker moved quick, hands shaking as he gathered supplies. He didn't ask questions, just packed the goods and slid the sack forward. His voice barely carried. That place at Crow's Gate? Rhett gave a single nod. The room froze. An old woman's sewing basket slipped from her lap. Spools rolled across the floorboards in slow circles. Then the back door creaked open. A tall man stepped inside, hat brim shadowing his face, silver trim catching the morning light. The same rider Rhett had seen at the tree line. His eyes were sharp, measuring, calculating, and fixed straight on Rhett Calder. His rough hand hovered close to the butt of his revolver. Name's Briggs Varlow, the man said, voice smooth as aged bourbon. Heard you picked yourself up a curious little piece of property. Rhett Calder didn't answer. He gave the slightest nod, nothing more. Briggs Varlow's pale eyes never blinked. He reached into his coat and dropped a leather pouch onto the counter. It hit hard. The clank of coins inside rang loud as church bells. $500, Varlow said evenly. That's a sight more than 12 cents. Sign it over to me by sundown. The entire store froze. Behind the counter, Milt Harker jerked so bad he knocked over a jar of preserves. It shattered across the boards, glass and syrup spreading at his boots. Nobody moved to clean it. Every soul in that room knew what stood out at Crow's Gate. And now they were waiting to see whether Rhett Calder valued his hide. Rhett's grip tightened around the leather strap slung over his shoulder. His eyes locked with Varlo's. "500 for a busted-down shack?" Rhett drawled. "You ain't buying wood and nails. You're buying something else." A thin smile cut across Varlo's face. Sharp, cold. "I'm buying your common sense," he said quietly. "That place isn't meant for a man who plans to see next winter." A murmur rolled through the Ironwood folk. Fear hung thick as pipe smoke. That wasn't advice. It was a sentence. By the time Rhett rode back out, the sun was sliding behind the mountains. The sack of supplies weighed heavy in his hand. Varlo's words rode with him, mean and steady. As he approached the gate, his horse blew uneasy. The rope was gone, but the dark stain on the beam remained. Rhett's eyes lifted to the scar in the wood. Dried blood still marked the grain. The air felt colder there. Inside the cabin, the stove cast a warm glow against the walls. Asha was sitting upright. Her back rested against the timber boards, her eyes, black and steady, fixed on him. In the low light, he saw her clearly for the first time. Shoulders built like a fighter's, long arms corded with muscle. Bruises dark across bronze skin, she looked carved from iron and fire. "You," she said slowly. "You saved me." Her voice was rough but strong. Rhett set the sack down and poured water into a tin cup. "Couldn't watch them treat you like livestock," he replied. She drank in careful swallows, steadying herself. When she spoke again, her words came sharper. "I am Asha, granddaughter of Talok." Rhett said nothing. "They took me," she continued, "to break my people, to make Talok give up our land." Her hand tightened in the blanket. "This cabin, it is a warning." "A warning?" Rhett asked. She nodded once. "They hung me there so everyone would see. This house belonged to a white man, Darius Boone." Rhett's brow furrowed. "He found proof," Asha said. "Forged deeds. Judges and officials selling Apache land that was never theirs. He hid the papers here." Her eyes darkened. "They killed him for it." The weight of her words settled over Rhett like ash after a fire. "And those papers?" he asked quietly. Asha met his gaze. "They may still be here." Asha's eyes moved slowly around the cabin, then settled on the center of the wooden floorboards. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But they believe the papers are here. And me, I was only leverage." Her jaw tightened. "They kept me alive to keep Talok silent." Outside, the wind pushed through the warped planks, carrying with it a faint metallic rhythm, hammer on iron. Someone was setting stakes, making camp. Rhett moved to the narrow slit of a window and looked out. Shadows shifted in the dark. Horses. Riders dismounting. Briggs Varlo hadn't been bluffing. He'd sent the Varlo syndicate to watch. Rhett turned back toward Asha. The weakness in her was gone. In its place burned something fierce, not the fading spark of someone dragged from death, but the steady fire of Apache blood. "You saved me," Asha said again, stronger now. "So you stand with me. If you don't, we both hang from that gate." Rhett's jaw flexed. His hand drifted to the stock of his rifle by instinct. He'd only wanted quiet land, a well, a place to run thin cattle and mind his own business. Instead, 12 cents had bought him a war. Night came down hard, like a curtain dropped over the prairie. Rhett sat beside the window, Winchester resting across his knees. The stove had burned low, casting a dim orange glow across the walls. Asha stood now, steady on her feet despite the bruises, her shadow long and unbroken. Her eyes shone in the dark. Then it came. Hooves, slow, heavy, measured, like drums at a funeral. Rhett narrowed his eyes toward the ridge. Silhouettes formed against the sky. Torches flared. Laughter drifted down, raw and ugly. Then a voice cut through the night. "Rhett Calder, step out and speak like a man." Briggs Varlo rode forward into the firelight, silver trim flashing on his hat brim. Nearly a dozen riders fanned out behind him, guns low at their hips, eyes sharp, predators circling. Rhett opened the door and stepped onto the porch. He didn't lower the rifle. He didn't raise it either. "Bit late for friendly talk," he called back evenly. Varlo gave a dry chuckle. "I offered you $500. That offer's dead." His gaze flicked toward the cabin. "What we want is inside that house. Hand it over, and you ride away, breathing." Asha stepped out behind Rhett. Even wrapped in a blanket, she stood tall as ironwood. The torchlight caught the bruises on her arms, but it also caught the fire in her eyes. Several riders shifted in their saddles. They'd seen her hanging. Now she stood like something pulled back from the grave. "You tried to kill me," Asha said, voice deep and steady, "because I know what you're hiding. My blood won't buy your silence." Varlo's eyes thinned. His hand slid halfway toward his revolver, then stopped. "Strong girl," he said softly. "But you, Rhett, you're holding onto a wounded wolf." "She's pulling you into her war," Briggs Varlo called out. "Step aside, Rhett. Let her fall. You can still walk away breathing." Rhett glanced at Asha. There was no fear in her eyes, only faith. A washed-up rancher and Talok's granddaughter, two souls the world had already tried to bury, standing against a ring of wolves. Rhett spat into the dirt. "I paid for this cabin," he said coldly. "It's mine." His gaze hardened. "And any man who touches her answers to me." Silence tightened the air, thin and sharp as a drawn wire. Then metal scraped leather. Varlo lifted a hand. Rifles came up. Torchlight glinted along barrels. Rhett stepped backward into the cabin, pulling Asha with him. "Take the revolver," he muttered. "We fight." Outside, hooves pounded hard, shaking the earth. Firelight flared across the yard. The siege had begun. The front door rattled under heavy blows, like nails being driven into a coffin lid. Then the first shots came. Bullets tore through wood, planks split, splinters burst inward in sharp sprays. Rhett shoved Asha down just as another round ripped through the wall. His Winchester thundered back. One rider pitched off the fence line, hitting dirt hard. Smoke thickened the cabin fast. Each time Rhett fired, he heard curses and wild shouts outside. The Varlo syndicate hadn't come to scare him. They'd come to end it. Asha, still bruised and raw, gripped the revolver with both hands. Her fingers trembled, but they did not fail. She fired. A man crumpled at the gate. His body landed beneath the same beam where she had hung. The gate was no longer a warning. It was a line written in blood. "There's too many," Rhett growled, sweat cutting tracks through powder soot on his face. He kicked over a heavy table and braced it as cover, feeding fresh rounds into his rifle. Outside, Varlo's voice cut through the chaos. "Burn it down! Burn them with it!" A torch arced through the night and struck the dry roof. Flames leapt high, devouring straw and timber. Firelight danced in Asha's dark eyes. She rose, towering despite her wounds. "They will not take this house," she said through clenched teeth. Her voice steadied. "And they will not take me." Then, from far across the prairie came a sound low and deep. A war horn. It rolled across the land like thunder. Rhett froze. Over the ridge, beneath the moon, came riders. Hundreds, The Talok riders surged forward, forming a wall of horse and steel. Spears flashed. War cries shattered the night. Panic flickered across the faces of the Vale syndicate. Some turned in their saddles. Too late. The riders of Talok swept down like a desert storm. Vale cursed, yanking his revolver free. He spurred his horse toward the porch in one last desperate charge. Rhett stepped out through smoke and flame. He fired. The bullet tore past the silver trim of Vale's hat, snapping it sideways and nearly throwing him from the saddle. Asha stepped beside Rhett, tall and unbroken, and shouted in her own tongue. The answer came like thunder. Flaming arrows streaked through the dark. One struck a mercenary's torch, exploding it into sparks. Fire consumed the fence line. Apache horses closed the circle. Steel met flesh. Vale jerked his reins, trying to break free. But the Talok riders folded inward, sharp and relentless. They swallowed his men whole. Rhett stood on the burning porch, face streaked with ash and sweat, watching the tide turn in firelight. Beside Rhett, Asha stood tall in the smoke like a figure carved from stone, eyes burning bright against the fading firelight. They had lived through the night, but Rhett knew better than to call it victory. Whatever lay hidden in this cabin had drawn blood once. It would draw it again. And Briggs Vale had never been more than someone else's blade. Dawn bled red across the prairie. Smoke curled from the cabin roof, though the flames had been beaten back by buckets carried in by the Talok riders. The yard was littered with fallen horses and broken men. The scent of powder and charred timber clung thick in the air. Rhett sat on the porch steps, chest rising hard, hands still shaking from the long night. His knuckles were raw. His rifle rested across his lap. Before him knelt Talok. The old chief's silver hair spilled down his back, face lined by years and loss. His arms wrapped around Asha, pulling her close. She bent her head to him, powerful arms circling her grandfather. Tears cut clean paths through soot and sweat on her cheeks. "My granddaughter breathes," Talok said at last, his voice deep as rolling thunder. "But this is not finished." His gaze lifted to Rhett. "This cabin hides something men would kill to bury." Rhett looked toward the scorched doorway. Asha's words from the night before echoed in his mind. Darius Boone, forged deeds, proof. He rose and stepped inside. The cabin floor was blackened with smoke. In the center of the room, something caught his eye. A square patch of boards, sealed tight with dark, hardened resin. "Here," Rhett murmured. Talok nodded once. Two warriors stepped forward, axes in hand. The first blows rang through the cabin like gunshots. Resin cracked, wood splintered. The boards finally gave way, revealing a hollow beneath. Rhett knelt and reached down into the dark. His hands found metal. He hauled up a dust-covered iron chest wrapped in thick leather. Every man in the room leaned closer as the lid creaked open. Inside lay scrolls, deeds, official seals pressed into parchment. Rhett pulled one free. The signature was clear. Orson Haleck. Stamped beside it in bold red wax, Conrad Vale. Asha's jaw tightened. "They forged them," she said. "Sold our land to a dozen buyers, maybe more." Darius Boone found out. Her voice hardened. He tried to bring the truth forward. They killed him. Rhett sifted through more papers, ledgers, payment records, names scrawled in ink, judges, sheriffs, ranch barons. The sums were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars exchanged for stolen ground. The air grew heavier with every page turned. Each document was a knife pointed at the throats of powerful men across 3 counties. "Now you see," Talok said quietly. Vale was only a hunting dog. His eyes darkened. The men behind him are Orson Haleck and Conrad Vale. They will not yield. They will send the Vale Legion. They will burn this land. Kill any who speak. Rhett's fists closed tight. A 12-cent cabin. What he'd thought was a chance to begin again had become a tomb of secrets. And a spark that could torch an empire built on lies. He looked at Asha. She still trembled from the night's fight. But pride held her upright. Then he faced Talok. "They tried to silence you," Rhett said, voice hard as iron. "Now I know what they're hiding." He glanced around the smoke-darkened cabin. "I swear on this ground, this place won't be a grave again." Outside, the prairie wind rose fierce and restless, sweeping across the land like something waking. Storm clouds rolled in low and heavy, darkening the prairie like a lid closing over a coffin. Rhett Calder cinched his saddle tight and slung his Winchester across his back. Around the cabin, Asha and the Talok riders formed a wide defensive ring. No one spoke it aloud, but every man understood. Orson, Haleck, and Conrad Vale would come. And they would not come alone. The thunder of hooves rose from the distance, steady, relentless, like war drums echoing across open land. Soon the horizon filled with riders. Cloaks snapped in the wind. Rifle barrels flashed in the fading light. At their head rode Orson Haleck, his face set hard as iron, flanked by the Vale Legion. They halted at the gate, the same beam where Asha had once hung. Haleck's voice boomed across the yard. "Hand over the iron chest and the Apache girl, Rhett Calder. Do that, and you might live." His eyes narrowed. "You're just a broke cowhand. Don't let 12 cents buy your grave." Rhett stepped onto the porch, calm as still water. In his hand he held a stack of the recovered documents, their seals catching the wind. "These papers will hang you and Conrad Vale both," he called back. "You think I'd kneel now?" A ripple passed through the mounted men. Some shifted uneasily at the mention of Vale. Even they knew corruption cut both ways. Haleck's face twisted. "Attack!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the air, snapping past wood and flesh alike. The Talok riders answered with a rain of arrows and fierce war cries that shook the ground beneath their horses. The battle ignited at the gate. Rhett fired once. One rider fell. Fired again, another tumbled from the saddle. At the doorway stood Asha, towering and unbroken. She gripped her revolver in both hands, each shot cracking sharp as lightning. The Vale Legion began to falter under the combined fury of rifle and bow. Smoke drifted, horses screamed. The clash raged wild and close. Then Haleck broke through. Still defiant, he charged toward the porch, pistol raised at Rhett. But Asha moved first. She stepped into the gate, her broad hand swinging up with brutal force. The pistol flew from Haleck's grip. He hit the dirt hard, staring up wide-eyed at the papers clutched in Rhett's fist. "Justice is coming," Rhett said coldly. His Winchester aimed square at Haleck's chest. "No matter how many cabins you burn." Haleck was bound and delivered into the hands of the Talok riders. Within days, Rhett and Talok carried the iron chest and its damning proof straight to Marshal Rourke Dane. The seals were examined. The ledgers read aloud. Names spoken. 1 week later, Conrad Vale and his accomplices were marched through town, in irons, before a stunned public. The news spread fast across 3 counties. The 12-cent cabin no longer marked a hanging. It stood for something else. Asha, Talok's granddaughter, was known as the woman who walked back from death. Rhett Calder, once just another forgotten rancher, was remembered not only for his aim, but because he chose truth when it would have been easier to walk away. Years later, when the prairie wind drifted soft through tall grass, a faint lantern could still be seen glowing in the cabin window. Rhett sat on the porch, Asha beside him. Both watched the old gate. Where a noose once swayed, a wooden sign now hung. One word carved deep into its grain: freedom. Out on that wild stretch of land, a man paid 12 cents for a broken cabin. What he found wasn't lumber or soil. It was the weight of a generation's stolen truth. A girl left hanging as a warning. Blood-stained papers. A town too afraid to speak. Life can be like that 12-cent cabin. You think you're buying a small piece of peace, and instead you step straight into a storm. You think you're choosing something simple, but sometimes the land chooses you to stand for something far bigger than yourself. Rhett Calder had never been more than a weather-beaten rancher most folks rode past without a second glance. Just another man in dust-worn boots trying to hold on to a scrap of land. But the moment he sliced that rope from Asha's neck, he didn't just pull a woman back from death. He pulled himself back, too. Sometimes justice doesn't begin in courtrooms or governor's offices. It starts with one quiet choice, one man deciding he will not look away. You don't have to wear a badge of office. You don't have to command an army. You only need the backbone to say, "This is wrong," and mean it. Out west, where gun smoke drifts with the wind and fate is often written in dust, even a broke rancher can tip the balance of power. Not with wealth, not with titles, with conviction. Gold fades, deeds burn, empires rot. But the truth, once spoken aloud, has a way of cutting through fear. And when that voice stands firm, even wolves hesitate. That is the legacy of a 12-cent cabin. Not the land, not the battle, but the choice to stand when standing costs everything. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.